is Unapologetically Ashley, my podcast discussing topics such as dating, cooking, shopping, budgeting, and more, all with a disability. My goal is to show that, disabled or not, we are all the same, and while I may have a disability, it's not all of who I am. My name is Ashley, I'm 25 years old, and when I was born, the umbilical cord got wrapped around my neck 4 times with a knot, which cut off the oxygen to my brain, leaving me with a bunch of different disabilities, including CVI or cortical visual impairment, as well as a right hemiplegia, which is a type of cerebral palsy. Because I have both of these disabilities, oftentimes I can feel like an outsider, even within the disability community, like I'm trapped inside of a box. This can be quite isolating and lonely at times, and I can struggle with my disability, but at the end of the day, I'm just unapologetically Ashley. Hello and welcome into episode 4, Cooking with a Disability, discussing what it's like cooking when you have a visual or physical disability. For a lot of people with disabilities, cooking isn't really too much of an issue, and you might be able to still cook a lot of meals, especially if you're someone with a disability that doesn't really affect you when it comes to cooking or being able to do physical activities. For someone who's in a wheelchair, for example, who still has the use of their arms, they may have no problem using a stove or an oven to cook their food, compared to someone who has a physical disability that actually affects one of their hands, making it difficult to chop up food, for example, like in my case. I've tried putting the knife in my left hand and holding the thing I want to chop with my right hand, but when it comes to something circular like apples, that is quite challenging for me to use, and I'm always worried about it slipping and, me accidentally cutting myself because of that vision impairment as well. And there are always so many struggles when you have multiple disabilities when it comes to different tasks, and I think cooking is a big one where I just find it too hard to use a stovetop or an oven. And I used to use a stovetop sometimes when it came to like frying eggs, for example. That was something that my dad taught me how to use and how to do, but I still found that a little bit challenging, and I couldn't really use the stovetop for anything else. Now, over the years, I have gotten a little bit better. Like, for example, when I first moved out of my parents' house, I lived on a unit on their property where I learned how to do a few things for myself. For example, one of the first things I learned how to make was a smoothie. That was pretty simple. There was the fear of spilling it all over the bench or on myself, which I did do a couple of times, but just learning how to do it without spilling. And then it came to using a jug, which I would use to, make things like cups of tea or to heat up my pot of noodles. I learned how to cook things in the toaster, which was also pretty easy for me to use. And then I got a sandwich press. But the real big thing that came into my life that made it easier for me to actually cook things without having to rely on someone else to cook things that I wanted to cook in the oven was when I moved to this house and getting an air fryer. That made it so much easier when it came to cooking different meals. I actually started a segment on my channel quite a few years ago called Cooking with Ashley that was pretty separate from the rest of the topics I talked about, and it was like a special thing for me where I would just learn different things I wanted to cook and try out different things for other people like me with a physical disability or a vision impairment and some of the struggles that we face. And I learned how to cook a ton of different things in the air fryer, which changed my life. Now for me, when it comes to ovens, I'm afraid of burning myself, and even when it comes to wearing oven mitts, that's something that I'm still worried about. I'm worried about burning my house down. I'm worried about not being able to see the dials correctly or to know exactly how long to cook it for. And I know that you can get smart appliances now, but that costs a lot of money and I don't have that. I know that there are people out there who also have vision impairments or who are completely blind that can cook. Some of them are chefs, and it just comes down to what they were taught how to use, and a lot of them do use those smart appliances. Not all of them, but sometimes it comes down to what you're taught and what you're comfortable with using. And for me personally, while I know that there are blind chefs out there, I'm just not one of them. I'm not someone who really wants to learn how to use that, and then because of my physical disability as well, it becomes a little bit more challenging than someone who is completely blind or visually impaired using things like a stove or an oven. And personally, I'm just not fully comfortable with using that. Again, it comes down to personal preference and what you're taught how to use and what you're comfortable with using. But for me, the air fryer was such a game changer because I could cook a lot of things that people can cook in ovens in the air fryer. Like, instead of having frozen pizza that I would heat up in the microwave using this little pot that I found, I could now heat it up in the air fryer, and then eventually I didn't need to buy pizza from a pizza shop. I could make it myself in the air fryer, or other things like that, like cooking burger patties in the air fryer and then just heating up the buns in places like the microwave or in the toaster just to make them a bit toasted before I put the other ingredients on top. And cooking the cheese with the patty and things like that were a game changer for me. Things like cooking meatballs. I could cook meatballs in the air fryer and then heat the rice up in the microwave, and then just add some frozen vegetables on top that I would also heat up in the microwave. So it all worked out quite well. And while there are still some things that I can't cook, so I have to buy them from the supermarket, either pre-made, like things you can get off the shelves, for example, spaghetti and sausages or things like that, or you can get other pre-made meals that you can cook in places like an air fryer or a microwave, and you can just like heat them up and they're ready to go, but they're not the best for you. So buying those frozen meals are the better option, the ones that you can like make and prepare yourself. But frozen meals that you can get, some of them are pretty good, some of them are made really well and you just have to heat them up and they're already all done. So it just comes down to what's easier and how you feel that day. Like, for example, if I'm not feeling well, I'll just go with the easiest option possible and just kind of cook that up for myself. Whereas if I'm feeling good and, I really want to make a big meal for myself, I might cook some meatballs with some rice and some frozen vegetables, or, I might actually try and make something like a pizza, things like that, where I'm actually making something for myself. And when it came to cooking eggs, like I said, I learned how to cook them on the stove. My dad taught me how to make fried eggs, but I still found that a bit challenging because there's always fear with stoves. I know how to switch it off, but when it comes to stoves and ovens, that's something I'm still afraid of. So my mum looked up how to cook eggs in the air fryer, and because of my vision impairment, I still struggle a bit to get the right settings. I have an air fryer where I can turn little dials, so I can turn it to 180 and then I can turn it to cook for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. And I found that for eggs, the best way to cook it in the air fryer was about 8 minutes, but there is no little number for 8. There's just a little line, like with a analog clock, I think it's called, where you have some of the numbers, but then some of them don't have numbers, so you can't really see exactly what it is on. So sometimes I'll undercook it, which means it's too runny, or I'll overcook it, which means that, it's squishy and it's basically like hard inside, and that's not something that I really like. So it just comes down to how you like your eggs when it comes to either soft or hard boiled, and personally I prefer soft boiled, like not too runny where there's still a bit of yolk and it still runs a little bit, but it's hard enough that you can kind of squish it onto your muffin or onto your bread. Also with the muffins, when making eggs, I would stick them in the toaster and then I would put butter on them, and then I would stick that back in the toaster so the butter would melt and it tasted so good with the eggs. And then you sprinkle on some salt and pepper and it just tastes so good. And also hash browns were another big one that I learned how to use in the air fryer, because when it came to cooking them other ways, I tried the toaster and they were always super soggy, and then I tried my little special pot in the microwave, but while it did make them crispy, I found that the air fryer was the best solution, and cooking them for about 15 minutes was the best result, because 10 minutes they were still a bit squishy in the inside, and 20 minutes they were way overcooked. So 15 was nice and crispy, but still really nice. You could bite into them and they were still soft inside, but they were also crunchy, and that was perfect. So it just comes down to learning different things and trying different things. I could cook all sorts of things. I could make myself fish and chips, or I could make myself a hamburger, or I could make myself meatballs, or I could make myself nuggets, or, things like that, where I would buy the frozen things from the supermarket and mix them in with other things and make something really delicious. But for right now, I'm happy with my air fryer and the things I've learned how to cook in it, because I can cook a lot of stuff and I can heat up a lot of stuff, so it works well for me. And for anything that I am struggling with, I can get someone else's help. For example, my mum has still cooked me a few things that I wasn't able to make myself, and she also found another place that has pre-made meals that are fully pre-made, and I just have to cook them in the air fryer for a couple of minutes and they're done, or things like that. Another recent thing I learned how to make was nachos. Now, normally my mum in the past would just make me the nacho mince, and then I would stick the chips in it, and it was easy. But I took it one step further by having her again make the mince, because I couldn't do that myself. She would make it, and then I would put it in the air fryer on top of chips with some cheese that I would melt in the air fryer, and it would come out nice and good. And then you can put your guacamole or your sour cream on top, and it works really well. For me personally, when it comes to my disability, because I not only have a physical disability, which makes it hard to chop, which, yes, there are solutions to for people with physical disabilities, the fact that I also have that vision impairment on top, where my vision impairment is quite severe, it means that for me, it's quite challenging when it comes to chopping up things and doing certain tasks in the kitchen. And so I just needed that easier solution, and frozen vegetables were a better solution than trying to chop up vegetables or fruit. And, having the fruit during the day, or making smoothies where I can instead chop up the fruit, buy frozen fruit for my smoothies, and, have a smoothie with strawberries and banana, or, different things like that. And that allowed me to have that full meal, but easier. And by buying those frozen fruits and vegetables, as well as those frozen meals and other things, I was able to still have good meals for myself without having to rely on someone else to make them for me, because I couldn't use a stove or an oven, or couldn't chop things up properly. And again, some of this I could probably learn and, over time could get better at, and I am. I'm definitely much better at cooking now than when I first moved out of my parents' house. I've definitely improved a lot, and it just takes time and years of practice to learn what you can and can't do. And there are still times where I will get takeaways just because they're easier for me to buy, and I might want like a proper meal cooked properly, or I might be going out with friends or family members, and things like that, where it's just easier. That's the other thing when it comes to cooking things in an oven versus cooking it in an air fryer. For an air fryer, it's about enough for one, maybe two people, whereas with an oven you can cook for like 5 people. So, things like that, where you just have to sort out your preferences and decide, okay, what's easier for me to do. And again, there are people out there who are blind or visually impaired who can use a stove or an oven and have practiced. Maybe it's because they have a smart appliance, or maybe they've just learned how to use that appliance. Maybe they didn't lose their sight until they were older, so they still knew their way around their kitchen. Over time, I've gotten so much better. I've learned how to make so many different meals in the air fryer that I couldn't make before, and I've really become way more independent than I used to be. First, only being able to make smoothies and make cups of tea, to then being able to cook things in the toaster and cook things in the sandwich press, to now being able to use an air fryer to make all kinds of meals for myself and be way more independent. And I'm still learning how to make different meals, whether it be heating up something that's already pre-made in the air fryer, or cooking something myself where I'm buying frozen things like frozen meatballs or frozen vegetables, but then I'm putting it all together to make a proper meal. And I think that it doesn't matter how it's made, it only matters if it's good. It might not taste exactly the same as if I cooked it on a barbecue or in an oven, but it still tastes good. So when it comes to cooking with a disability, it all comes down to you and what you are capable of doing as someone with a disability. And for me, while I may never be able to use a stove or an oven, I am every day learning new things to cook in the air fryer and practicing and, getting better with what I can and can't cook and knowing what my limits are. And I think that that's really important for being able to be independent enough to cook meals. I may not be cooking amazing meals every night, but I'm cooking enough to sustain myself and, to live off of. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to disabilities and cooking with a disability is just be able to make yourself a meal each night, no matter what it is, and practicing over time to get better at different things so that you're able to make more and more meals yourself and not rely so heavily on other people or takeaways or other frozen meals that may not be the best for you, but buying that frozen ingredients and then cooking it yourself, which is different from buying a frozen meal or, buying a good frozen meal that's properly made and then frozen and then, heating it up and things like that. So it just comes down to what's easiest for you as someone with a disability and what your solution may be at the end of the day. And while what you're making might look different to someone who isn't disabled, at the end of the day, you're still making the meal for yourself. You're still allowing yourself that opportunity to be independent with what you're cooking and allowing yourself to still get that nutrients you need and cook for yourself so you have a meal on your plate every night. You don't go to bed hungry and things like that. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that and acknowledge that disabled people will be doing things differently. But at the end of the day, if we get the same result, that's all that matters. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!